Are there any two superheroes more inextricably linked in the public conscious than Batman and Superman? I don't mean characters explicitly designed as partners or as part of a team. I'm talking two solo characters with their own stories and from their own worlds who nonetheless exist in tandem, who are defined in part by their association with each other. Superman and Batman were the first two superheroes, the ones who set the template for a fantastical costumed hero battling evil hidden behind the veil of a mild-mannered alter ego. And they've remained the flagship characters for DC Comics, hell, for superhero comics generally, since their creation. In a post-MCU world, you might make a case for Iron Man and Captain America, but they don't share a history like Batman and Superman do. These characters were created in vastly different times, in vastly different industries, for vastly different audiences. And while the two have represented opposing ideologies, especially across the last 20 years, that conflict is less stark, less elemental than it is with Batman and Superman. Both men are fundamentally dedicated to the pursuit of justice and the protection of the innocent, but their means are quite different. Superman is a friend, a beacon of kindness and moral virtue. Batman is the brooding avenger, grim and mysterious. There are alternative interpretations of these characters, of course, and both are more complex than just these summaries, but these core traits exist in most iterations. One glance at the two, and it's clear they are kindred spirits and mirrored opposites. And even someone with no pre-existing knowledge of either character could intuitively understand who is light and who is dark. Across a history as best friends, bitter enemies, and everything in between, Superman and Batman have consistently paralleled each other across decades of peaks, valleys, and major milestones. Most recently, we have Matt Reeves' The Batman and James Gunn's Superman. Both films emerged in the wake of DC's first failed attempt to launch a cinematic universe, each starting fresh with a reboot returning the character to the fundamentals. Both films also skip over the origin story. Both begin with the hero established to the general public, but still relatively new to superherohood. Both even feature a major twist where the hero's parents are revealed to be far less honorable than in previous iterations. Yet even with these parallels, this pairing also emphasizes those core differences between the characters. Superman is endearingly corny, a big-hearted dork with an equally big, goofy smile, a man who radiates sincerity and kindness. His metropolis is sunny and blue-skied, even when it's in peril. Gotham City, meanwhile, is perpetually cast in darkness and drenched in rain, a crime-ridden hellscape ripped from noir. The Batman who resides within it is violent, angry, and quietly obsessive, a hero so similar to the evils he fights that the film's villain erroneously believes the two are allies. There's even a kind of the Virgin Bruce Wayne, the Chad Clark Kent quality between them. Clark is so effortlessly romantic and sensual with Lois Lane. The two have chemistry to die for, even when they're arguing. Batman and Catwoman also have chemistry, but the relationship begins with Bruce spying on Selina from afar, and even as Batman, he can barely speak to her. The sexual tension between them goes unconsummated, as their differences and psychological hang-ups keep them apart despite their clear desires, while Lois and Clark's differences are secondary to their romance. Batman isn't strictly a loner, he has allies, but he's a fundamentally more insulated person than the open-hearted Superman. And yet the root of both men's heroism is helping others, each film repeatedly emphasizing the hero saving lives. I've been thinking about this pairing a lot, and about how perfectly it expresses the yin and yang dichotomy of Batman and Superman, fundamental opposites and part of the same whole. But they're also far from the first movies to contrast the Man of Steel and the Dark Knight. For as long as Hollywood has been making blockbusters out of superhero movies, paired Batman and Superman flicks have led the way. From the analog era's first attempts at superhero blockbusters, where Richard Donner's Superman and Tim Burton's Batman served as the genre's pioneers, to the new millennium superhero boom, where the world's finest were among a whole slate of costumed heroes, to the dawn of the cinematic universe, where DC chased Marvel's success with who else? Batman and Superman. What strikes me across these many iterations is not just how Batman and Superman's parallel histories have spilled into the movies, but how these pairings have tried to tap into that yin and yang dichotomy. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. This video will pair up and break down the major cinematic iterations of Batman and Superman, from their cinematic creation in the 70s and 80s to their reinvention in the 2020s, comparing how filmmakers have expressed their contrasting personalities and values, and ultimately consider how the consistent counterpointing of these characters draws a more complete picture of both. Let's get started. Though technically separated by over a decade, Richard Donner's Superman and Tim Burton's Batman laid the foundations for their genre. The film that proved a superhero movie could be a success, the film that proved said success wasn't a fluke, and for years after, the peak of superhero cinema. These are also the versions where the differences between Batman and Superman are most pronounced, right down to the structure. Donner's film is a full-fledged origin story, with extended sections covering Krypton's destruction, Clark's arrival on Earth in his teen years in Smallville, discovery of the Fortress of Solitude, and his alien heritage, before finally arriving in Metropolis. We don't actually see Superman until the film's second act.
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you?
Batman, meanwhile, formally introduces himself
I'm Batman.
less than 5 minutes after the opening credits wrap. This is in part an indicator of the normalization of superhero movies, even by 1989. After Donner proved audiences would accept a superhero on screen, Burton didn't need to justify him. Batman can simply be. But it also reflects how much more straightforward Batman's origin story is compared to Superman's. For as much material as can be drawn from how Bruce learned martial arts and other skills for his crusade, the core of Batman's origin can be summed up in one sentence. A boy watched his parents get murdered by a mugger and dedicated his adult life to fighting against the evils which took his family. How Bruce Wayne could do this might be complicated, but why could not be simpler. So simple, Burton can relegate the origin to a dreamy flashback and some expository dialogue from the supporting cast. Movies are already littered with stories of people who lose a loved one and seek retribution. Doing so while dressed like a bat is just one more step. But Superman's origins are a lot more complicated. A combination Moses/Christ allegory which begins on a dying alien world and moves through rural America and a sprawling big city. Clark, Kal-El, is also an orphan, and he also witnesses a parent's death at a young age, but from a heart attack rather than a personified evil. Accordingly, Superman's heroism is not born out of a single act of trauma like Batman's is. Instead, it comes from a higher calling, a message from his Kryptonian father, and a more general sense of duty, that his capabilities must serve the betterment of humanity. I know it's the wrong superhero, but with great power comes great responsibility really does sum it up perfectly. This sense of a higher calling motivating heroism rather than vengeance is part of why Superman feels a more altruistic character than Batman. But as motivations go, it's also more abstract than bad guy kills parents, and in turn, it takes more time to convey to an audience. While focusing so much on Superman's origin, including the openly weird alien elements of it, Donner also grounds the film in a more recognizably realistic setting. The Smallville scenes were shot in rural Alberta, which convincingly passes as Kansas, and while Metropolis is technically a fictional city, the film makes no effort to hide that it's actually New York. If anything, the movie actively rubs it in your face. The goal was to make the audience believe in Superman, believe that a man can fly. To make that leap, especially in 1978, the audience had to first be able to accept a real world in front of them. Superman's unyielding goodness also just pops a lot more when he's situated in a cynical, post-Watergate 70s America than a fantastical comic booky world. Fantastical comic booky worlds are, of course, the name of the game with Gotham City, and especially in Tim Burton's hands. This movie shuns realism, its city a construction of miniatures and elaborate sets, which combine influences from German Expressionism and Gothic horror. While Superman was explicitly set in the 70s, Batman blurs the aesthetics of 30s gangster movies and 40s film noir with some contemporary technology. The only 80s giveaway are the Prince songs on the soundtrack. Given how emotionally simple Batman's story is, the film is free to embrace fantasy in its setting, and that fantasy helps convey the character. Remember, the big leap with Batman is not that a man would avenge the murder of his parents, it's that he would do so dressed as a bat. This version of Gotham explains that. This is an otherworldly place, a city that exists outside of time, a site carved out of the Gothic imagination. Its protector being a giant bat who lurks in the shadows feels strangely natural as its greatest villain being an evil clown whose greatest violence is afflicting a sickening, unnatural grin. The differing aesthetics also speak to the characters as symbols of light and dark. Batman is a movie of heavy, heavy blacks, while even the night scenes in Superman are shot with a bright glow. But the visual contrast I find most significant is the costumes. That was really awkward. Again, we have a color disparity. Superman mixing bright red and light blues with splashes of yellow, the suit pulled right from the comics. Batman, meanwhile, actively sucks out the few shades of the comic. Typically, Batman's suit was a dark gray which contrasted with a black or dark blue cape and cowl, but the movie suit is almost completely black, save for the yellow utility belt and outline of the bat symbol. He is even more a mysterious creature of the night on film than he is on the page, a trait magnified all the more so by the obvious lack of thought balloons or voiceover to give insight into his thoughts. Beyond the color, there's also the material of the costumes. While Batman wears constricting rubber, which almost completely encases him and restricts his movement, Superman's nylon tights are open and freeing. He looks completely comfortable and at ease, and it reflects not just how Batman is more tortured, but also more guarded and closed off from others. The kind of person so insulated that when his journalist girlfriend asks why he does what he does, he responds by vaguely saying, "It's just something I have to do because no one else can." Superman is utterly open, and even innocent, so much so that he doesn't even flinch at telling his journalist girlfriend about his destroyed homeworld, a detail which leads Luthor to kryptonite.
So, what do I owe you?
1077. Same as my PIN number.
Superman effortlessly lets people in, while Batman shuts them out, and that's communicated clearly in their suits. Each film was a commercial smash that launched 3 sequels of varying success before the franchise imploded after a disastrous 4th film, taking Batman and Superman off the field until the 2000s. The new millennium brought new iterations of Batman and Superman to the silver screen. Well, sort of. Batman Begins was a full-blown reboot, a ground zero reintroduction to the Dark Knight which dove back into Batman's origins, placing him in a world wholly distinct from Burton's or Joel Schumacher's. Superman Returns brought in a new actor and creative team, but was technically a continuation of the Christopher Reeve movies, ignoring 3 and 4 but picking up after 2, with Superman returning after a 5-year absence to an Earth that has moved on without him. Its content actually does parallel Batman Begins, in that both are about the protagonist returning to his city after a long time away, and each film spends a lot of time on how the world reacts to their return. There's a meta-commentary here given the last time Batman and Superman appeared on movie screens, they were the face of superhero cinema, and are now coming to a genre that's moved forward without them. But the distinction of comebacks, of reboot versus belated sequel, is noteworthy. One obvious explanation is that Batman's origin was untapped story material, while Superman's had been thoroughly covered by Donner, and therefore going backwards with Batman made sense in a way that it didn't for Superman. Okay, that's fair, but we also need to look at how each of the old franchises collapsed. The decline of the Superman and Batman movies is superficially similar, but in practice played out very differently. The former basically just fizzled out. Superman 3 underperformed compared to the first 2 movies, and led to Superman 4 being made cheaply by B-movie production company Cannon Films in 1987. That movie bombed, and that checks out. It's shoddy, it's not very good, and you won't find many people who'll defend it. Well, except me, kind of, because I honestly don't think it's that bad. Like, there's some cute scenes in there, and with more polish and a couple rewrites, I think it could have had some potential, but I digress. The point is, Superman 4 failed, but it failed quietly.
Hello? Mrs. Pommelhorst? I'd like to get down now.
Few people saw it, and by the 2000s, I'm not sure how well known the film was outside of comic book nerds and bad movie aficionados. Ask your everyday Joe in 2002 about Superman movies, they'll probably talk about the first two films. The Batman movies ended with much more spectacular failure.
Hi, Freeze. I'm Batman.
After riding high on Batman Forever's success, Warner Brothers pushed full steam ahead with Schumacher's follow-up. Batman and Robin had a massive tentpole budget and an intense marketing campaign, complete with dozens of product tie-ins. It was one of the most publicized films of 1997, meaning that its failure was loud and inescapable, the kind of flop that still makes $200 million worldwide. Batman and Robin couldn't fade into obscurity. The film would eventually be reappraised, which I covered in another video, but in 1997 it was scorched earth, and by the 2000s had entered into infamy, the title an easy shorthand for bad movie. Put it this way, Superman 4 and Batman and Robin each have about the same score on IMDb, but Superman 4 has been rated about 57,000 times, and Batman and Robin has been rated 280,000 times. I think it's fair to say the Batman franchise had a much greater incentive to run from its cinematic past, especially considering how much more recently Batman and Robin was. So that's one explanation, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It's not just that Begins rejected Batman's cinematic past, but that Returns wallowed in Superman's. It's a direct sequel to Superman 2. John Williams' theme is reused repeatedly. The credits are the same. The film reuses archive footage of Marlon Brando as Jor-El. Lines are repeated.
You really shouldn't smoke, Miss Lane.
You really shouldn't smoke, Miss Lane.
Well, I certainly hope this little incident hasn't put you off flying, miss. Statistically speaking, of course, it's still the safest way to travel.
Even Brandon Routh is stylized to resemble Christopher Reeve. It's more than a follow-up to the old Superman movies, it's a full-on tribute act. This in part comes from Bryan Singer, who was reportedly a much bigger fan of Donner's original film than he was the Superman comics, but it also shows something bigger. The cultural perception of Superman is so inextricably tied to the Christopher Reeve movies that the franchise has trouble letting them go. Even when Man of Steel took a hard left turn with Superman, the film still includes a brief cameo of Reeves' likeness, and by the time Justice League hit theaters, the score was again mixing in elements of the Williams theme. Even James Gunn's Superman stylizes its credits after the old movies. That's not to say the Burton Bat flicks have been immune from nostalgic pilfering, but new versions have been far more willing to leave them behind. The original Batman was also a phenomenon with an iconic original score, but it has served as just one more expression of the character, rather than a definition. Looking past all this framing, how do the films actually present their characters? Largely in ways consistent with the old movies. One especially revealing comparison is how each film introduces its superhero in full costume. Both do so with a set piece. Superman first appears in a spectacular bit of business where he saves the passengers of a plane in free fall. The mechanical failure is collateral damage to Lex Luthor's scheme, but functionally, the scene is yet another example of Superman as a helper during accidents and natural disasters. That is how he returns, both diegetically and for movie audiences. Batman is introduced busting up a drug deal, a crime fighter first and foremost, proactively striking at the heart of corruption in Gotham. In other ways, though, the characters have actually swapped places. Now Batman lives in the realistic and modern American city, and Superman lives in a city outside of time. Gotham still has some stylized elements like the Narrows, and Nolan does more to hide the fact that he's shooting in Chicago than Donner did with New York, but a lot of Begins is about situating Batman in a grounded American city, something the sequels would push even further. But Superman Returns' weird sequel status does peculiar things to its setting. The film takes place 5 years after Superman 2, which theoretically places it around 1985, but the film casually includes all sorts of 2000s era technology. But it isn't strictly set in the 2000s either. There's an Art Deco quality to the Daily Planet especially, and other bits of fashion and style suggest a blurring of time periods. It's a lot subtler than Burton's Batman, but it's not totally dissimilar either. But the most shocking trade is in tone, with Superman Returns the far gloomier film. Batman Begins certainly starts out in fairly grim fashion. Bruce is being held in a South Asian prison, Gotham is a deeply corrupt hellscape, and the crux of the flashback-heavy first act is a child grieving for his murdered parents. Doesn't sound like a recipe for lighthearted escapism, but the movie that ensues is all about overcoming the despair, with Bruce finding some degree of purpose in his grief, and Batman becoming a symbol for, and catalyst of, Gotham's salvation. Superman Returns is attempting a similar structure. It begins solemnly with Superman grieving for Krypton and feeling lonely. He's sad that Lois and the world have moved on from him, but then his adventures spark a renewed hope, and he even learns that Lois's son is in fact his own, and he isn't actually alone. Which is a little odd given Superman wiped Lois's memory at the end of Superman 2, so she theoretically wouldn't remember that they slept together, but whatever. The structure of Returns means for sadness to give way to optimism. That's all well and good on paper, but it doesn't really translate on screen. Brandon Routh may have the smile, and Clark remains an endearing dork, but Superman is very mopey, even late into the film. The big epiphany with Lois and his son is rather muted. Then there's the climax, this dour fight with Luthor on a big gray rock that goes on forever. And yeah, dour is one of the main words I'd use to describe Superman Returns. Superman can say he stands for hope, and the film can blast the Williams theme all it wants. The feel-good wholesomeness is just not there. I'm not sure if this is a limitation of Singer or if the national mood in a post-9/11 America was just too somber, but hopeful affirmation is at a minimum. Superman still smiles to the camera in the closing moments, but it's not nearly as feel-good an ending as
I never said thank you.
And you'll never have to.
Now that puts a smile on my face. Execution is a factor here. Superman Returns is a competently put together movie with some highlights, but it's not as exciting or as fun to watch as Batman Begins. That's my opinion, of course, you're free to disagree with it, but it's a feeling echoed in the general reception. Both films made comparable amounts of money at the box office, with Superman Returns actually slightly outgrossing Begins, albeit at a much higher budget, but Begins generated way more enthusiasm from critics and audiences.
Last year, Spider-Man 2 got Spider-Man right, and this year, Batman Begins is the Batman movie I've been waiting for and hoping for. It's one of the year's best films.
Superman Returns had some solid reviews too, but few raves and more pans. Ebert quipped in his review that the film, like its hero, was dead in the water, and that would end up being an apt metaphor as the series was once again dormant following Returns. This marks the first major schism in Batman and Superman's shared cinematic history. While Returns failed to resurrect the Superman franchise, Begins launched a whole new trilogy of Batman films to towering success, films frequently cited as the gold standard in superhero filmmaking. Superman had previously taken the lead on the silver screen. He was the first superhero to star in a major blockbuster, and that movie would directly inspire Christopher Nolan's Batman films. But by the time The Man of Steel returned to cinemas, he'd be taking cues from The Dark Knight. The next big chapter in the Batman and Superman cinematic story is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, the first time the two characters would share the big screen together. But before we talk about that film, we need to talk a little bit about its predecessor. Man of Steel blazed a completely different path for Superman on film. It was the first Superman movie to more or less completely shed the Christopher Reeve movies, a Batman Begins style reboot which told Superman's origin with a non-linear structure. Nolan and his wife and producer Emma Thomas were in fact producers on the film, with Nolan even having a story by credit. Beyond these surface similarities, there is a lot of Batman in Zack Snyder's Superman. He's melancholic, tortured, and his film emphasizes action and violence far more than prior Superman movies, right down to the title. Snyder's maximalist visual style certainly emphasizes Superman's godlike abilities, but its colors skew gray and moody. Even the colors on Superman's costume are muted and desaturated. And to be clear, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with a darker Superman. In fact, it's worth exploring a more solemn take. A Superman who is still virtuous and fundamentally good, but whose goodness is quieter and less overflowing. Where Clark has to work to find that goodness within himself. But this Batmanification of Superman poses a problem when it's time to cross over with Batman himself. Put simply, where's the contrast? We have two moody, melancholic superheroes born in tragedy who spend the bulk of their time brooding about the world and their place within it. Even their conflict with each other is basically the same. They both think the other guy is a dangerous force outside the rule of law who leaves violent chaos in his wake. Both become obsessed with opposing this force, even as an older mentor figure tells them to back off. Two angry men talking about death and blood amidst heavy scowls. A lot of aesthetic differences are also smoothed over by virtue of being in the same film. The costumes, for example, in previous iterations so distinct, are much closer in color and material here, as if they were designed by the same person. Because, yeah, they were. There's more of an effort to distinguish Gotham City from Metropolis, at least. In this movie, they're sister cities separated by the Bay. Metropolis more affluent and high class, Gotham grungier and more impoverished. That's a neat idea, but it doesn't really translate on screen. They both just look like vaguely modern American cities to me. Half the time I'm not even sure if a scene is set in Gotham or Metropolis. There are still some differences between the characters. Set pieces maintain Superman as a helper responding to natural disasters and accidents, while Batman is a crime fighter. At least nominally. One of the showcase Batman scenes is actually him stealing kryptonite from Lex Luthor, which is less about fighting crime than it is Batman getting to be the one who kills Superman, but whatever. The basic difference of old is maintained. Clark also remains a good boyfriend, sharing an intimate and sexy moment with Lois, while Bruce is shown briefly in bed with a nondescript woman and clearly distant from her, his only friend being a very exhausted Alfred. But they do ultimately exist on the same spectrum, visually and in personality. A dark and moody superhero versus a darker and moodier superhero. Rather than characters who represent day and night, we have characters who represent different times of night. Superman and Batman, the story of 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. And that's the big irony with Batman and Superman. It's the first movie to put Batman and Superman together on the big screen, and it's also the least interesting pairing. I have far less to say about it than I did Donner and Burton or Singer and Nolan. For all the literal conflict between the characters, the film loses sight of the shared dichotomy that has made Batman and Superman such an enduring pairing. Too many distinctions are lost, and I wonder if that's inevitable to any full-blown crossover. The best version of Batman and Superman together on screen, by far, is World's Finest, a 3-parter episode of Superman the Animated Series which crosses over with Batman. And it rules. We get to see lots of examples of how Bruce and Clark, their alter egos, and their broader worlds collide in a fun story which plays on their differences before building to their team-up. And there's lots of highlights. For all the literal punches Snyder's Batman lands, nothing stings as much as...
Thank you. I couldn't have saved Lois without your help. I'm aware of that.
It's about as perfect a crossover as I could imagine, but it also dilutes the individual. Specifically, these are episodes of Superman that Batman is made to fit into. Batman and his supporting cast are rendered in the style of the New Batman Adventures era of Batman the Animated Series. It's an animation style which blends a lot more seamlessly with Superman's art style, but at the cost of the specific character and personality of the old show. Something had to be lost to accommodate the characters sharing space. On the other hand, maybe the erosion of distinction is a byproduct of Batman v Superman's subtitle. The movie isn't just about Batman and Superman, or Batman ving Superman if you prefer. It's about dawning a new superhero universe, with Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg further smothering the titular heroes. It's that dawning which ultimately serves as the final beat of the film, leading us into a new cinematic universe. That ensuing cinematic universe would have its share of highlights. Despite my skepticism, the Snyder Cut was a marked improvement over the theatrical version of Justice League. But the universe would ultimately collapse, as films flopped, plans were scrapped, and audience interest plummeted. Which brings us right back to the start. Where Zack Snyder merged Batman and Superman in their worlds and characterization, Matt Reeves and James Gunn have firmly split them apart. Not since Donner and Burton have these cinematic versions of Batman and Superman been so distinct in style, tone, and in the men at the center. The distinction is so deep, it even comes out in their tastes in music. Clark's favorite band is the Mighty Crabjoys, a fictional pop-punk band that Lois makes fun of for being a lame pop act for the mainstream rather than true punk rockers. Bruce, meanwhile, sits alone in the Batcave listening to a depressing Nirvana B-side. And that's the perfect encapsulation of how these characters are stereotyped and dismissed, isn't it? Superman is cornball fluff for children, Batman is moody angst for edgelords who still behave like teenagers. But neither film leaves it there. Both return to this musical expression in their endings. Superman closes out with the Teddy Bears song Punk Rocker, an anthem about accepting all that is uncool about yourself and embracing sincerity. It's a callback to Clark's comment that maybe caring about people is the real punk rock, but it's also a rebuttal to all the criticisms that Superman was corny or lame. Except instead of insisting that Superman is cool actually, Gunn's film embraces all that makes Superman dorky, from his most geeky comic book elements to his unyielding wholesomeness. It owns it all without embarrassment. You can do it too if you're sincere. The Batman's conclusion sticks with Nirvana's Something in the Way, but instead of Bruce sulking in his cave, it's set to images of Batman saving lives, with a particularly poignant moment where one of those saved lives clings to Batman for safety, as Bruce realizes it's not enough to be Gotham's vengeance. He needs to be Gotham's hope too. The film does not refute the edgy darkness of Batman and his world. It's as enamored with it as many of the fans are, but it understands that there is more to the character, that the darkness is fueled by a deep care for people. These moments are each among my favorite scenes in all of superhero cinema, expressions of character principles which softly yet firmly refute the ways those characters have been stereotyped and dismissed. They are also moments which culminate films that, taken in tandem, fully express the dichotomy between Batman and Superman. I'm not saying these are the best Batman or Superman movies, or even that they're the truest to the real spirit of the character, but that together, they best express all that divides and unites Batman and Superman. No doubt, the two will continue to parallel each other in the movies and beyond, and it seems inevitable they will share the silver screen again. But if Reeves and Gunn have made the definitive Batman-Superman movies, the finest of the world's finest, if you will, then the most iconic superhero duo of all time has a cinematic expression worthy of their legacy.